Hello students, welcome to your week 3 video. I have lots of things I want to cover in this week's video. As you see on the beginning of this slide, we have information from Markel chapters 2 and 3. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Intercom article and the history of technical communication articles, and I'm going to show a few of the resume drafts that you all have submitted and provide some comments on those. So without further ado, we'll go through this slideshow. I hope you have something to take notes with, so you can take some notes and write down page numbers that I reference as I go through. So you read Markel's chapter 2, or you're going to be reading his chapter 2 this week. And one of the things I wanted to point out right away in this chapter concerning understanding ethical and legal considerations are the 4 moral standards that Markel points out at the beginning. And he gets these from Manuel Velasquez. And these 4 moral standards are rights, which concern people's basic needs and welfare and point to the assumption that we expect product information to be honest and clear. The next is justice, how the cost and benefits of an action or policy are distributed among a group. The third is utility. It considers the positive and negative effects an action or policy has or will have. And care concerns the relationships we have with other individuals. The closer a person is to us, the greater the care we owe them. So he includes this because he believes that this language can help us to resolve ethical conflicts. And as a technical writer, you are working with a company's information and also serving as the interface between the company and the public, helping to make their products comprehensible or usable to the public. But you're also working to serve your employer. Serve the employer's needs. So on page 21, he mentions that as an employee, you have responsibilities to your employer, to the public, and to the environment. Those are the parties of responsibility that he identifies: the employer, the public, and the environment. I think it's very interesting that he singles out the environment so importantly in his structure here. So your obligations to your employer include that you will be competent and diligent, so you will work hard and you'll do your job adequately. You'll be generous, so you're obligated to help your coworkers and stakeholders with your knowledge. You will be honest and candid. You will be confidential, and you will be loyal. So those are all of the things that you are obligated to do for your employer. Now you're also, and this is on page 22, and this pertains to technical communicators in particular, you're expected to be honest with the public. When products are used according to their instructions, which the technical writers create, they must be safe and effective. Most court rulings today are based on the assumption that companies know more about their products than consumers and users do. So as you can see so far in this talk I'm giving, I'm pulling a lot of this information and some of the wording directly from your textbook just to isolate some of the content that's of most critical importance to you. So now turning to the third item, the environment, the technical communicator is obligated to alert supervisors to environmentally damaging situations and to reduce damage. Protecting the environment, though, can also be expensive. And as you know from being a human in our world, that's a tension that a lot of companies really struggle with and sometimes err on the wrong side. They err on the side of financial expediency rather than environmental security. I guess that's me editorializing by saying that's the wrong side, but you can form your own opinion on that. Okay, so now you might wonder, and especially after reading the chapter, what are your legal obligations as a technical communicator? So plagiarism is an ethical issue, not a legal one. Copyright infringement is a legal issue. So plagiarism is something that can get you into trouble in the university setting because we have a code of conduct. And as a student, you subscribe to that code of conduct and you're expected to uphold it. So you can get booted out of the university for committing an act of plagiarism, but you're not going to be arrested for it. You can lose your job, though, and you can be publicly shamed for plagiarizing. We see that happen a lot in the press. But it's important to understand that it's not a legal issue. But copyright infringement is a legal issue. So you're going to want to understand that content from your book to be able to distinguish between the two. Now, within a corporate situation or a governmental organizational structure, if you're working as a technical communicator, you will be expected to reuse information within the business. And reusing that information is okay. It's a foundational part of the single sourcing model where there's a huge repository of content, say for 3 different printers that Epson makes, and that's sort of parceled out to the different manuals that you create as the communicator. So you're kind of plugging in pre-existing content. So that reuse of information is okay because it's owned by the corporation for whom you are creating content. But you cannot use another company's information because that is that company's intellectual property. So understanding that distinction is pretty important. Now, liability law is important to technical communicators, and you might wonder why. Well, manufacturers are responsible for providing their users with adequate warnings and information. There are different standards, and in the US and internationally, you would need to know what those standards are. And you have a duty to warn. You have a duty to warn the users of certain products. So this is something that's always been really interesting to me, the ethical culture of an organization. So corporations should strive to have a strong ethical culture. So what is the effect of this strong ethical culture? Well, maybe you wonder about that. Your book covers this starting on page 30. So both formal and informal cultures, ethical cultures within an organization, means that these can be used to reinforce a corporation's culture, such as a detailed formal code of conduct, or just the tenor, the climate that exists in the workplace. That's also part of the corporate culture, the ethical culture. So most large companies in the United States and professional societies have these codes of conduct, and they address most of the bullet points on page 31 of your textbook. An effective code of conduct has 3 major characteristics. I have them here in bullet points. Number 1 is it protects the public rather than the members of the organization or the profession. Number 2, it is specific and enforceable. It is specific and comprehensive. And number 3, it is enforceable. So we're going to take a little break from this PowerPoint, and I'm going to show you some corporate codes of conduct just to point out some of the differences. Here we have the corporate code of conduct from Herman Miller. Now, Herman Miller makes fancy chairs and desks and office furniture, but they have a corporate code of conduct, and you see that it falls under the legal area in their on their website in terms of their organization. They have a letter from their president and CEO, but if you scroll down, they have a well-organized declaration of what their employees are required to do. And they have all of these headers that say, our employees are required to, our employees are required to. Down here, our employees are required to. Now, one thing that you'll notice here is this compliance with SEC, that's Securities and Exchange Commission. So if a corporation is going to file with the SEC, they have to have a corporate code of conduct that meets the requirements of the SEC. So that's the kind of corporate code of conduct documentation that is designed for that audience. Sometimes they have a different version on their website. It doesn't have to comply with federal rules of the creation of the document. But you'll see that this is all organized actually in a pretty straightforward way. And they have a hyperlink here for reporting violations of the code of conduct using a web tool, and they have phone numbers. If you remember, in the last year, Wells Fargo got in a lot of trouble for trying to coerce or behind the backs of their customers create new bank accounts. And some of the employees knew that this was wrong, and they reported it to the violations line that Wells Fargo had available, and that was silenced. So that's an even huger problem. That's why the CEO of Wells Fargo has stepped down, and there's been a huge outcry against it. But organizations all often put into their code of conduct a way for employees to identify and reach out if there's been a problem that they notice. So here is the PGE, Pacific Gas and Electric Corporate Code of Conduct. This is their Employee Code of Conduct. Now, this is a PDF, so you'll see it's different than the Herman Miller one. Also starts with a message from their CEO, and this is a long document. You'll see that it is 38 pages plus. It's a booklet. It uses a lot of design principles to engage the reader. I'm not going to flip through it much here because it's very extensive, but you can check it out here if you want to. pgecorp.com, and it's their code of conduct.pdf. So you could put that into a Google search and find it that way. Now here is Amazon's. This is their Code of Business Conduct and Ethics. They have several subcategories here. This is under investor relations, corporate governance, and then Code of Business Conduct and Ethics. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through this, but you can see it's fairly concise. It's got 12 items in it. This is not probably the official document that they would submit to the SEC, but this is a summary, perhaps, available on their website here. And again, they indicate that if there are violations to the code of conduct, that they want their employees to reach out to report those violations. So continuing back to the slideshow here, you might know that one possible way of reaching out when you don't see any resolution to the ethical violations within your organization is to become a whistleblower. I want you to read in your book a little bit more about what whistleblowing is. Now, I have asked you in your one of your discussion board exercises coming up to look at social media policies. Please be careful not to confuse the corporate code of conduct or the corporate ethics policy with the social media policy. These are two different things. They both do concern an employee's ethical conveyance of information or use of information and communication, but they're different things. The social media policy outlines the behaviors and practices that a corporation expects its employees to uphold when using social media. So please don't be confused when you're doing that online discussion board activity. Okay, so now moving on to chapter 3, this is quite a different subject. This is about the writing process. Certainly in English 110, English 120, and in English 219, you probably covered all of these parts of the writing process in detail. So I'm not going to go over them exhaustively here, but I will identify them for you. And remind you that you probably already have a writing process that works for you, or maybe it doesn't work for you and you might want to look for something else. But what we're looking for is a writing process that is effective and efficient. And if you are intending to become a professional communicator, you will need to be pretty formal about using these steps in your process. So planning, drafting, revising, editing, and proofreading are the famous 5 components of the writing process. And each of these has subcomponents, and you can learn all about that in chapter 3. So there are lots of ways to plan. So principally important in planning is understanding who your audience is and what they need. And then you generate content. So you can go through a formal process of understanding your audience by using an audience profile sheet, interviewing members of your audience, doing other kinds of research to find out what your audience needs and who they are. To generate content, you can also enact one of several or multiple approaches. You could ask the journalistic questions, who, what, when, where, and why. You can brainstorm, you can free write, you can talk with someone like a subject matter expert. Dr. Clint Lanier recorded a video about interviewing subject matter experts, and you're going to be watching that as your practitioner video number 1 in this class. You can do something like clustering, you can use a branching technique. You might be familiar with some of these from your other core writing classes. So you can look some of these concepts up online on your own time if you wish. So another aspect of planning, of course, is organizing and outlining your document. I want you to think about, what are your planning strategies? Do you have any? When you get an assignment, do you just start sitting down and writing it? That would mean that you're a heavy reviser, that you do a lot of the cleaning up and revising and refurbishing later on. But some people are heavy planners where they outline and they schematically organize their document very carefully in advance. Okay, so drafting and revising. Once you arrive at the drafting stage, you will likely have a lot of information to pull in. You will need a good understanding of the form your document needs to take. So you can use a template or design your own document. If you use a template, you have to understand the limitations of templates. So Microsoft Word comes with a lot of templates built in. They're not always good. So you need to really scrutinize them for how effective their design is. Later in the semester, when we talk about design principles, you'll be able to have more tools in your arsenal to evaluate whether those designs are effective or ineffective. So editing and proofreading is the last item here, the last items in the writing process. Okay, so editing is a process, as you all know, where you catch errors with grammar, punctuation, style, usage, and diction, excuse me, as well as mechanics. And Markel notes that that's the use of numbers and abbreviations. And there's some tools that you can use during the editing process. Are these online tools? Are these hiring an editor? What are these tools? What do they include? And what are the goals of the proofreading process? Now, you know that we offer at UNM a whole class in editing. All technical communication majors and minors across the country offer editing classes. So it's a critically important part of the writing process. Okay, so I want to move along outside of the Markel book to the Intercom article, which you read for today. When you read it, you're just reading those 2 pages in that Intercom issue, 2 or 3 pages, written by Craig Baer. He happens to be a graduate of our university. He was the author of this article that outlines this competency exam that the STC is launched last year, so people can get a credential as professional technical writers. And he and his colleagues at the STC believe that there are 9 central competencies that technical communicators need to be proficient in. So those are outlined in that article. I want you to think about these seriously. We're going to come back to them over and over this semester, and your last assignment in the course centers on these 9 objectives. So you want to know them. How do they relate to our course goals and objectives? Look back at the objectives in our syllabus and think back to how they relate to each other. So read that article, read it carefully, and know that you're going to come back to it this semester. And also you should know what the STC is. It's good to know what that acronym means. So I also gave you 2 articles this week, one by Durack and one by O'Hara, about the history of technical communication. It's useful to know how this field evolved. What is its history as a discipline? And before it was an academic discipline, what kinds of writing would be considered technical communication by today's understanding of the term? So that article is the O'Hara one. The Durack article is really interesting, because it talks about populations of people who might have existed on the margins of this academic discipline, specifically women in her case. But they have had a historically significant role that has not been acknowledged. So it might look like a fairly single gender profession. Now that has changed significantly. There are many, many women working as technical communicators. But I want you to read that article and think about how the field has been shaped and the role that women play in it, and whether it's been a gender-blind profession or whether there have been sort of gates in the way of women's progress.